Good morning. We cordially welcome all of you to the first edition of JLF Valladolid, Spain. It is our pleasure to present today The Sacred Mountains Searching Himalayan Masters. Namita Gokhale, Óscar Pujol, and Ranjit Hoskote in conversation with Guillermo Rodríguez. The sacred terrain of the high Himalaya has a timeless tradition of spiritual and mystic quests. The edited anthology, Mystics and Skeptics, Searching the Himalayan Masters, by author and festival co-director Namita Gokhale, explores stories of faith and spirituality. The essays in this book contain narratives from wanderers and seekers rooted in myths, legends, and anecdotes of sacred traditions. Acclaimed poet and translator Ranjit Hoskote speaks of his essay on the Kashmiri medieval woman mystic Lal Ded. Venerated scholar Óscar Pujol studied Sanskrit at the Benares Hindu University. He has also authored the first Sanskrit-Catalan dictionary. Together with author and founding director of Casa de la India, Guillermo Rodríguez, they discuss the magic and mystery of the Himalaya. I'll introduce each of the speakers and invite them to come up. Namita Gokhale is the author of 21 books, including 11 works of fiction and editor of numerous anthologies. Gokhale is co-founder and co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival. She has been recognized both for her writing and her commitment to multilingual Indian literature and cross-cultural literary dialogue. Óscar Pujol studied Sanskrit at the Benares Hindu University. Óscar has published several books and translations from the Sanskrit classics and 2 Sanskrit dictionaries, the Sanskrit Catalan and the Sanskrit Spanish. In 2002, he helped in establishing Casa Asia in Barcelona. He also founded in 2007 the Instituto Cervantes in New Delhi. Ranjit Hoskote is a poet, cultural theorist, translator, and curator. His 8 collections of poetry include Vanishing Acts, Central Time, Hunch Prose, Jonawale, and Ice Light. His translation of a celebrated 14th century Kashmiri woman's saint's poetry has appeared as Ai Lalla, the poems of Lal Ded. Hoskote curated India's first ever national pavilion at the Venice Biennale under the title Everyone Agrees, It's About to Explode, and co-curated the 7th Gwangju Biennale in South Korea. He has received the Sahitya Akademi Golden Jubilee Award, the Sahitya Akademi Translation Award, and the S.H. Raza Literature Award, and the JLF Mahakavi Kanyahaya Lal Setya Award for Poetry. Lastly, our moderator, Guillermo Rodríguez, is the founding director of Casa de la India, a pioneering cultural center in Spain. Casa de la India has become the model for India's cultural diplomacy abroad. An expert in Indo-Spanish relations, he is a multidisciplinary scholar, translator, cultural manager and producer, and has published in India, Spain, the UK, France, Poland, and Germany on contemporary Indian literature, Indian aesthetics, and Bhakti literature. He is the author of When Mirrors Are Windows, a view of A.K. Ramanujan's poetics, and co-editor of Journeys, a Poet's Diary. Over to you, Guillermo.
Thank you, Shamina. Well, I'll start in Spanish and then we move to English. Muchas gracias por asistir a esta sesión. Esta es la primera sesión que tenemos matinal aquí en el Círculo de Recreo. Y también quiero agradecer la presencia del embajador de la India, Dinesh Patnaik, que nos acompaña, y muchos de los autores. Voy a ser muy breve porque vamos a hacer la sesión principalmente en inglés, pero tienen traducción simultánea. A warm welcome also to Ambassador Dinesh Patnaik. Okay, we start with an amazing topic, and one that is very dear to me because there are several reasons I think I was chosen to moderate this session. Namita has asked me to give my personal experience, very brief in 3 minutes, how I connect to the mystics of and the Himalayas. I think also because I was supposed to have contributed to the book, but my life is sometimes very difficult, so I couldn't manage. So I'll explain you very briefly my relationship with the Himalayas and with this amazingly edited book, and then we move on to their journeys and what is actually to be found in this treasure house of experiences. Every experience with the Himalayas, which are a metaphor for a lot of people, a metaphor of achievement, if you're a sportsman. We hear about all these treks going to Everest, which have become kind of a vulgar experience also. You go to the Himalayas, it's a commercial aspect nowadays. But throughout the centuries, and of course in the mythology it's there, it's also there from the point of view of the Western travelers, mainly the way we have read about them. And in my experience, it was Alexandra David Neal who mesmerized me with her writings. I always wanted to get there. It was like a dream for me. And as a very young student, I set out going east, more and more east. I started in East Germany because I grew up in Germany. Then I explored the Soviet Union in those days, early 90s. And one of those chances, I got the opportunity to travel overland with the Trans-Siberian Railway. And this was when Soviet Union was breaking up, went through Kazakhstan, ended up in Kashgar. And from there, I made my way to Golmud, where I was able to get on the first ever, after Tiananmen Square, the first bus that was allowed for foreigners to enter Tibet. What I found in Lhasa was something that's impossible, because I always say we were very fortunate, and I think Óscar, who also spent that time in India, we were the last analogic travelers. The last generation of analogic travelers. No internet, not even ISD, not even international, at the most telegram. And when I reached Lhasa, you could sense nothing had changed. It was quite, I would say, more similar to what Marco Polo might have found than what it is now. And I'm not kidding about it, because now they've done colonialization of, Han Chinese have moved in with their barber shops and shopping malls. From Lhasa, went to explore first the Shishak Pangma on my own, just walking, sneaking into trucks. I had no permit to be in Tibet. I won't tell you the dodgy parts. Ambassador is here. So anyway, I sneaked into Tibet. I was able to attend the coronation of the Karmapa. There were only 5 foreigners. The Karmapa is the second in the scale of after Dalai Lama, in Tsurpu, and moved on Shishak Pangma, made it to the base camp of Everest, and went to advanced base camp. And there was a Lithuanian mountaineering expedition who was sponsored by the Americans. So it had failed that year. Nobody made it to the Everest. And they identified me as a possible messenger. I said, "You're going down to Kathmandu?" "Yeah, I'm planning to go." "Okay, can you deliver this letter to the Russian embassy, because we don't have an embassy in Kathmandu. We'll sponsor your trip. You go down." I said, "Okay, fine, if you sponsor my trip." So I went down in their truck, made it through back into, I had never been to India. This is my first experience to India. I had never been to India. I came all the way from Valladolid, overland hitchhiking, Trans-Siberian, ended up in Kathmandu, handed over the letter, and the Russian consulate received me. They were very surprised to see a very odd-looking personality with long beard, because I'd not shaved, maybe like a mystic. On the way, I stopped by at Milarepa's cave. Milarepa is in the book, which is close to Shishak Pangma. And the consul said, "Don't tell me they've made it." No. So they failed, and he was very happy. The Russians were very happy he failed. Then I went down to the border, took the train from Gorakhpur. It was a night train. Arrived in Benares at 4:30 in the morning on the train. I had never been to India. I had not read too much about India. And there was this rickshawala. He said, come, Dashashwamedh Ghat, Dashashwamedh Ghat. And drove me to Dashashwamedh Ghat. It was Navaratri. Took me on a boat. And there I could see all the candles and the sunrise.
And India claimed you.
And India claimed me. This was my first experience, not an airport, no immigration, no hassle, no taxis. This was the first time I saw the Indian sun. Was like that, coming through the Himalayas, and it completely changed me. So this is the story, and now over to Namita. I think the beauty of this book is that all of them who have contributed, either indirectly or directly, have a very personal experience with Himalaya. And it's always something that changes you, because just visualize now. Namita has asked me to ask you to make an effort. It's out of this world. It's what we have a word in Spanish, inabarcable. It's so huge. The mountains are so big, you don't know if you're in this earth or in another planet. It transforms you. Namita.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, which was an introduction not only to the Himalayas, Himalaya as they call it. They don't call it in the plural anymore because the Himalaya is anyway in the plural, but it was an introduction to India, and you made the most from the abode of Lord Shiva to the city of Lord Shiva. So you were drawn there. Now, I'd like to tell all of you about this book, though this session is not about this book, but this book is about this session. It's called Mystics and Skeptics, Searching Himalayan Masters. And I come from the central Himalayas, from a town called Nainital, and I'm very deeply attached to the mountains. Even if I am not there, wherever I am in the world, a bit of me remains in my hometown. And whenever I travel to any mountain anywhere in the world, if I'm lucky enough, whether it is Scotland or whether it is Boulder, Colorado, where I love the Rockies passionately. I think the Rockies are really beautiful mountains. But a bit of me thinks always of the Himalaya. Why is that so? Why? I'm not claiming that any one religion is greater than any other religion. It has nothing to do with Hinduism or any one religion. But this book has mystics and skeptics, mostly from the Tibetan religions and the Hindu some traditions, because they are located in the Himalayas. As Guillermo said, mountains are a metaphor for striving, for climbing up. And in this book itself, there's somebody called Sherin Tashi from Bhutan, who's written about the trance runners, who go at extraordinary speeds through the mountains, and it's a mystery, they don't share it with anyone. But he was fortunate enough to know trance runner, so he's talked about that. And here, there's another essay in the book that talks about these trance runners, maybe 2 centuries ago, who used to have something like the Olympic Games there. They used to have training camps, but they would never share their mysteries. They would never share their secrets. And their secrets were not some magical secrets, so much as training, pacing, breath control, and prayer. I want to tell you, the reason why I did this book was because it's the same skills as I use as a festival director, which is that I try to curate different ideas and put them together, and I use the very good fortune and privilege of being associated with the Jaipur Literature Festival and with 2 or 3 other festivals in other ways, to know the community of writers. So I can reach out to friends and say, can you help me with this book? So I reached out to Ranjit for his essay, because as I said, most of these essays are on the skeptics are on anybody, because mystics and skeptics implies that I don't always believe the nonsense that is taught about mystical things, but often they are true. And his beautiful essay is about the Muslim Sufi saint, which he will tell you about later. But the mountains like to keep their secrets. And the other day, there's another person here called Romola Butalia who's written an essay. And I was talking to her on the phone, and our mountains are under a lot of ecological tribulation. They're having a very, very difficult time because the government is going on building roads there. The tourism industry in my hometown and around the mountains is eager to welcome tourists. But the mountains are too fragile to take so much infrastructure. So there are landslides, they are collapsing, all kinds of things are happening which are happening around the world really. And so she told me, you know, Namita, when too many people come to the mountains, then the mountains shut their secrets. And in the Tibetan tradition also, in Bhutan especially, there are the Tertons who are the people who know how to access these secrets or who are given these secrets. And the Terma, which are the hidden secrets, they are the treasures which only the wise can possess. But they don't want to make them too public. And in Hindi, this is called rahasya. That, you know, everything in the world in the world of Instagram and social media and instant communication, there are some things nobody needs to know. They need to be kept a secret. And I have respected that and not put everything in. You want to interrupt, ask me something?
I wanted to ask you two quick questions related to what you've just said. On the one hand, you are a festival curator. You also curate books and anthologies and edit. Is it the same process? Because it's, you know, many people may not know, and this is an invisible art. Curating anything, a festival, an event. Ranjit is also a curator, by the way. He's familiar with the arts. Does it come as an inspiration to you, how you put the pieces together? And is it a festival curating process similar to curating a book like this? This is my first question. Yes.
I think it's something like having a magpie mind. You know, you need a mind that is curious about everything and the confidence to try to explore things which are not your immediate subject. And sometimes, I mean, I have introduced Priyambada Natarajan on black holes, and I must say I know very little about black holes. I knew a little more, I read it up. So subjects I don't know about, I try to learn about through the curation process, meet those people, bring them together, so that every aspect of our festivals or my books, we try to bring often contradictory, disparate ideas together. Right? The magpie, as you know, is a bird that goes and steals little things, a ring from here, a bit of bread from there. It enjoys these little intellectual thefts that we do in our curation. You may not know, but Ranjit himself is a very, very accomplished curator. So I think the curatorial mind is part of it, and thank you for asking that.
And now more concretely around the book, we have Spanish audiences here. Of course, it's a mix of an international audience. For us in Spain, mountains, of course we have the Pyrenees, you know, we are surrounded by several mountain ranges, but you know, it's more connected to sports, frankly speaking, you know. Of course, also stories and literature as well. But why is it that the Himalayas, and for our, you know, audience in Spain, if you can explain how many traditions have evolved out of the Himalayas, the connection to Buddhism and how Buddhism traveled, and why is it that you have used the word secret and secrecy, you know? To you it may seem natural to connect wisdom with something that is secret, where here the missionaries always wanted to explain things and spread the word about any wisdom, whereas over there in a lot of Himalayan tradition, it's something you have to be initiated in. And there's a lot of that in this book. Initiation, whether it's a trance runner, whether it's a particular tradition of the Buddhist, the Tibetan, or any of the other Hindu currents, why is it something that you have to be initiated in? What is this transmission of wisdom and knowledge? It's very different to our Christian tradition.
I'd love to try to explain it, but you asked me so many questions that I'll come to the last one first.
Please.
And you can remind me. On this question of secrets and the modern world where people think they can know everything, I do think it's wonderful that everybody knows everything, and I respect social media and the modern world and instant gratification that comes with it. But I do think everybody doesn't need to know everything, because sometimes knowledge which is complex or which needs a little hard work to attain, that knowledge, you must have work for it. It can't be given out like toffees to a kindergarten class, you know. It needs the initiate to go through many stages. Milarepa was this great saint who I relate to personally a lot, and 11 times he had to build this tower, and 11 times the tower was destroyed. And one would think, why was his guru so cruel? But he wasn't being cruel. He was training him in resilience and in belief. So these, the secrets are esoteric knowledge which comes when you are ready for it. Otherwise it gets devalued. So much knowledge gets devalued simply because it's made too easy. When it's made too easy, it loses its complexity. So that's the first part of it. And initiation, like in any religion, comes also from grace. You don't have to be a degree holder or something, or an intellectual. You never know when the doors of grace open out and give you that blessing. The second thing about the traditions of the Himalayas is like this, that these are the youngest mountains in the world. They are still growing at, I don't know how many centimeters, 1 or 2 centimeters every year. The Eurasian plate and the Indian plate are pushing against each other. And I do feel there is a different energy in those mountains. What it is, I do not know. But there is, I won't call it a spiritual energy, but there is a certain energy. You feel as though these mountains are alive. And the traditions are very deep, because what later became a lot of the Hindu traditions and of Lord Shiva and the myth that defined India came from there. But before that, there was the Siberian shamans who traveled all the way from Siberia. Their traditions traveled. So a lot of these come from ancient Siberian shamanic traditions. And then there was the Bonpo religion, which was again a shamanic religion, but that came from there. Then that moved on to the Hindu traditions, to the tantric, Hindu is a recent word, but to those traditions. And then you had the Tibetan traditions, which, because Lord Buddha was born not on the foothills of the Himalayas really, and then after a long journey, Buddhism went back via the mountains to China, to Asia, to all of Asia, and found a deeper home there. So that is the intense connection there.
Thank you, Namita. Ranjit, are you a mystic or a skeptic? And tell us a little bit about Lal Ded, please, the incredible mystic woman from Kashmir.
Oh, a bit of both, really. And I think that's part of
I asked him over a coffee yesterday, and he wasn't able to respond, so I insist.
I thought I'd hold it for this audience. But that question, I think, is at the core of the book. It's not really a binary. I have a sense that whichever tradition you look into, whether it's Lal Ded here or Hildegard of Bingen or any mystic across the world's traditions,
Santa Teresa,
Teresa of Avila, absolutely, you will find that there is a certain interplay between the mystical impulse and the skeptical one. And I think that's what makes for the richness and intensity of the spiritual experience. So that's my brief answer. But I also want to say that these seemingly contrary poles are present to us in every level. For instance, our languages pull us in different directions. I'm very tempted to say the Himalayas, which comes naturally when I speak English, but if I was speaking Hindustani, I would say Himalaya. So I want to carry this motif of doubleness in what I have to say. But also I thought what I'd do is, since we're talking about languages and literatures, I might just begin by reading a verse or a vak of Lal Ded, whose work I've translated, and that's the essay in the book. It goes like this. Ami pan sodaras navicheslaman katibozide myon metidi tar. Amin takin ponuzan shaman zuv chumbraman garagatsaha. And the translation, or at least my translation, is, I'm towing my boat across the ocean with a thread. Will he hear me and help me across? Or am I seeping away like water from a half-baked cup? Wander, my poor soul, you're not going home anytime soon. And for me,
you may have to read that again in Spanish when we have the translation.
I hope you'll translate, Lala, at some point. But I also read that particular work with a reason. It's because I belong to Kashmir, but the Kashmiri diaspora have been away. Our people have been away from the mountains for a very long time. So when I think about the Himalayas, it's always with a sense of circling back home. And that's what brought me to translating Lala. I grew up, again, you know, in English we keep saying Lala for some reason. The proper pronunciation is Lala, so that there's a schwa at the end. So for me, it's a figure I grew up with, a figure who was revered, whose aphorisms, if you will, were part of normal living. But because of this diasporic distance, I had to bridge the linguistic connection, relearn the language. And in the 20 years that it took me to work on these translations, it also made for a transition from a very personal, if you will, ethnic connection to Kashmir, to recognizing that this figure of Lala was politically and culturally extremely important, because for 600 years, she's been available and alive to Hindus as well as Muslims in the Valley of Kashmir. She's been Laleshwari to Hindus, Lala Rifa to Muslims. And it's in these last 25 years or so that there's been a very, very strong polarization of this figure. So people have taken sides. The point of a figure like this, a saint poet, a courageous woman of the 14th century, is that she straddled these barriers. I also make the point on the basis of the linguistic evidence that these poems, this corpus of works, these poems, they've been added to over the centuries by anonymous contributors, people who were male and female, Hindu and Muslim, Pandits as well as peasants, people of very, very diverse locations who all came together under the signature of the saint.
Again, for our Spanish audiences, why is it so important to bring out, and there have been a number of anthologies, I'm reminded of A.K. Ramanujan's also translations of Akamadevi. We have, you know, female poets who have become like big stars nowadays because they've been promoted. And why is it so important to stress the point that, you know, women saints, these because for them it must, and you mentioned this in your short essay on, you know, and they have all certain things in common, you know, the lives, how they struggled and have to defy society. Tell us a little bit more about that context, you know, what, as a strong figure, you know, about her life, because I'm sure audience they want to know a little more about her as a human being and how she contributed and why it was so revolutionary in that context.
No, Lal Ded marks a rupture of a certain kind in the Kashmir Shaiva tradition, because up to that point, up to the 14th century, it was primarily a teaching lineage taken forward by male householders. They weren't really ascetics in the valley. But when you have this woman quester who seeks larger spiritual horizons, there was no way she could have stayed at home and been a quester, because at home, she was subject to the obvious familial and patriarchal mandates. So she actually had to leave home and place herself at the mercy of the world. So that was an extremely courageous decision for a Brahmin woman in the 14th century to set out on this journey, to seek masters and teachers. And remember that she didn't start a new school, but she marks a threshold between an older Shaiva tradition and a relatively more recent Sufi tradition. And when you read the works, you see that there's a tremendous archive of religious experience that comes through. There are strong connections to the Pashupatas, prior forms of wandering seekers. So to me, these poems are actually a group portrait of South Asia's very, very diverse religious traditions. And again, I say this because we're living through a period when our imagination is being claimed and constrained by narrow forces. So it's very important to reclaim from the archive of the past figures who stand for a plurality and a diversity of experience. And also to make the point that religion is rarely a simple experience, that it involves doubt, it involves invention, it involves a constant rededication to questions.
If I could just say something here. To me, when I come to this part of the world, you know, I always think of the great figure of Saint Teresa of Avila. And there is so much of the same spirit of both determination and intellect and striving. So for me, Lal Ded gets the same place in my heart.
Just to give a bit more context of the literary traditions of India and for them to relate, people often ask me, why do you think Spain and India connect? Like we saw yesterday, a performance of Sufi poets. And of course, there's a number, you can give a lot of different replies, but deep down, I think it's a concept that you call bhakti. I have a devotion. The devotional tradition in India, the bhakti tradition, which evolved in different parts of India from the 9th century till 17th, 18th, it went on in different traditions and the various currents, sometimes overlapping with Sufi, sometimes overlapping with the Muslim tradition and various Indian traditions, has a lot in common with our mystical tradition. Because it's all about taking God or the figure, the divine, from the hierarchy, be it in Latin or be it in Sanskrit, down to the common people and give it a personal voice. Whether it's through the nirguna or saguna, through the abstract or through the personal God, but you give it a vernacular language. And bhakti was responsible for the flourishing of a lot of those languages. Just like here, translating the Bible into German, reformist movement and a lot of the Castilian traditions bring God to make it personal, like, God in the kitchen, as Teresa said, in the kitchen fire. That's where you find God. And that capacity or ability to be open up through music and dance to experience the divine is very common in Spain and India. So thank you for translating Lal Ded. We'll try to translate it further on to Spanish. And here, talking about translation, we have one of the most eminent, I would say, the most competent translator of Sanskrit into Catalan first and Spanish. He created the first dictionary of a modern dictionary of Sanskrit into Catalan, and then became the Sanskrit Castilian Spanish dictionary. In your work as someone who works with texts and somebody who goes into the etymology of things, whenever I have doubts with a word, you have to go to the root, he tells me. You have to go to the root. And he's a specialist as a philologist, and he's lived so many years in Benares. In the tradition of the kavya, of the poetics and the poetry that you've been worked in, and you have written about tantric or whichever other tradition, how does the poet or the mystic use words to express this vastness of the Himalayan? Why is it so important? Please.
So thanks, Guillermo, for putting the text in the limelight. And yes, I would like to speak about the classical description of the Himalayas in the...
You want to do it in Spanish or in...
whatever, I don't know. I took my notes in English, but...
It can also be in Catalan, yes?
Well, I don't know. That will be difficult, I guess. Let's mix, Spanish and English or whatever is there, no? But, so, thanks very much, I say. So, of course, my personal relation with Himalaya also is very long. I dream of the Himalaya, actually, but I literally dream of the Himalaya.
So, if I could interrupt for a minute, the book begins with a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which he has just translated, which says, "Of immovable things, I am the Himalaya." So,
and perhaps we could start with a very simple question, not for the Indian people, I feel they know. You know what means Himalaya? Does the people know why Himalaya is called Himalaya?
You say Himalaya.
I say Himalaya.
so explain this in Spanish.
que lo explicaré en español porque realmente va dedicado a nuestra audiencia española. Himalaya, muy simple, quiere decir, Hima quiere decir nieve y Alaya quiere decir casa, mansión, morada. Por lo tanto, la casa o la morada de las nieves. Es así de simple. Un nombre, otro nombre quizás más frecuente incluso que Himalaya o Himalaya en sánscrito es Himavan. Himavan, que quiere decir el que tiene nieve, el que tiene mucha nieve. ¿De acuerdo? Y a mí me gustaría compartir con vosotros la descripción clásica, en la literatura clásica de la India, de los Himalayas. Y ahora lo digo en plural. Y esta descripción pertenece al primer canto de Kumara Sambhava, el origen del príncipe o el nacimiento de un príncipe, del gran poeta Kalidasa, que es el llamado el Shakespeare de la India. Es el poeta sánscrito más célebre, ¿no? Y aquí una pequeña anécdota. Cuando yo era estudiante en Benarés, la poesía sánscrita, especialmente los grandes poemas sánscritos que se llaman Mahakavya, Maha es grande, como Mahatma, y Kavya es poesía. Todos los grandes poemas sánscritos tienen un canto que es extraordinariamente erótico, porque era una poesía, la poesía erótica era muy común. Pero en la India moderna, a los estudiantes, a los pobres estudiantes de sánscrito, nunca nos daban para leer el capítulo erótico de los poemas, que todos queríamos leer, que era el octavo, y en cambio teníamos que leer el primer capítulo, que era la descripción del Himalaya. Porque lo mismo pasaba con otras obras de teatro sánscritas, ¿no? Pero bueno, aparte de la anécdota, el canto octavo de Kumara Sambhava es extraordinariamente amoroso, es muy bonito, ¿no? Pero en el canto número 1 tenemos esta descripción del Himalaya, que es una descripción clásica. Y si me permitís, vamos a pararnos un momentito. No voy a leer las traducciones, porque no tengo una traducción inglesa que me satisfaga. Hay una traducción española que está bastante bien, hecha por Virgilio Trabazo, que está en la Universidad de Santiago y publicada en ACAL. Es una traducción que te permite introducirte en el mundo del poema, porque tiene muchas notas, ¿no? Pero bueno, básicamente en el primer verso, que es famosísimo y sale en este libro, Vivekananda era un gran admirador de este primer verso. El primer verso es una visión aérea de los Himalayas, una visión extraordinariamente bonita, que parece hecho desde un avión o desde un dron. Empieza con mucha solemnidad diciendo, aquí en la región del norte, Uttarasyam Dishi, en la región del norte, hay el príncipe o el rey de las montañas, lo llama el rey de las montañas, que tiene un alma divina. Esta palabra es muy importante, es Devata Atma, porque el Himalaya no es visto como una montaña inanimada, sino realmente como un ser animado, que se puede mover y que se relaciona. De hecho, el Himalaya tiene una hija, ¿no?, que es Parvati, que es la que dará nacimiento a Kumar. Bien, entonces vemos desde arriba el Himalaya, que se extiende y que se baña en ambos océanos, en el océano del este y en el océano del oeste. Esto evidentemente es una descripción física del Himalaya, que está tanto en el Índico como en el Arábigo, ¿no? Entonces dice, se extiende entre el ámbito de la Tierra y es la vara de medir la Tierra. El Himalaya es lo que mide la extensión de la Tierra. Para ellos la Tierra era, evidentemente, el continente indio. Y lo que es importante es que el Himalaya es considerado como tierra de los dioses, Deva Bhumi. El Himalaya ahí juega un papel, en cierta manera, intermediario entre el cielo y la tierra. Ahí en el Himalaya podemos encontrarnos fácilmente a los dioses, porque los dioses nacen en el Himalaya y viven en el Himalaya. Y por lo tanto es un lugar que propicia el encuentro entre hombres y dioses o entre hombres y sabios. Es un lugar especial. Me alejo un momento del texto ahora. El Himalaya, yo siempre he pensado que sin el Himalaya no tendríamos espiritualidad india. La llanura ganguética es un lugar, es Kurukshetra. es el campo de batalla. Todos sabemos la tensión de la llanura india, en donde hay millones de historias, millones de negocios, millones de políticas, millones de confrontaciones en la gran llanura y millones de convivencias. Y cuando el ser humano ya no puede más, en Kurukshetra se va a los Himalayas, en donde realmente encuentra la verticalidad de la inspiración divina. Todos los grandes sabios indios han ido al Himalaya. Shankara fue al Himalaya, Vivekananda fue al Himalaya. Y en la soledad del Himalaya, tú desde el Himalaya tienes esa visión de pájaro de la llanura, que es otro mundo. Y en la soledad de las montañas tú elaboras las respuestas al conflicto que la llanura te plantea. Y cuando tienes algunas respuestas, bajas de los Himalayas, todos los grandes sabios bajan de nuevo, van a Benarés, como Guillermo hizo, que bajó del Himalaya y fue a Benarés también, y bajan de las montañas y en la llanura ellos ponen en práctica lo que han aprendido en las montañas. Esto es muy importante. Namita se refirió también a algo que me ha tocado, y es cuándo la enseñanza del Dharma puede ser pública y cuándo tiene que ser secreta.
Explica Dharma y explica Kurukshetra, por favor.
Vale. Me pones mucho trabajo. Bueno, Dharma, podríamos decir, es la ley cósmica que mantiene el universo y que hace que las cosas sean lo que es. Cuando actuamos de una forma dhármica, vamos en contra de la esencia de las cosas, ¿no? Y por lo tanto, entonces, la verticalidad de la montaña, la cumbre de la montaña, representa el aspecto visible de las enseñanzas, porque están allí, es como Shiva Link. Y cuando las enseñanzas son secretas, se refugian en la cueva del Himalaya. La relación de la cueva y la cumbre es simétrica. Los dos son... Y entonces la cumbre representa el aspecto visible, y cuando estas enseñanzas no pueden ser visibles, se refugian dentro de la cueva. Pero bueno, sigamos con el tema pero quería dejar claro la relación entre el Himalaya y la cuenca ganguética, que es donde se produce la lucha política india todo el rato. Y es en el Himalaya donde hay un espacio neutral extra más allá. Bien, en el primer verso se explica claramente que el Himalaya es este lugar divino que es la medida de la tierra. En el segundo verso encontramos una situación totalmente diferente. Encontramos la situación que también se da en que la tierra ha sido devastada. Y ha sido devastada por la culpa de un rey nefasto. Este rey nefasto es Vena, básicamente por la culpa de una política humana nefasta. Y es el rey Vena, que fue un rey maligno, que destrozó la tierra y que convirtió la tierra en un erial, en un desierto. Y para que la tierra vuelva a dar frutos, se necesita el rey virtuoso. Esto lo encontramos en la Edad Media también aquí. El rey virtuoso que fecundará de nuevo la tierra. Este rey es Pritu, que da nombre a la tierra, Prithvi, pero para que la tierra dé frutos hay que ordeñarla. Y para ordeñar necesitamos primero una vaca, que es la misma tierra, necesitamos alguien que la ordeñe, y el ordeñador es el monte Meru, que es el monte central del universo, es el eje del mundo, y está justo en el centro del mundo. Y necesitamos también un ternero para que la vaca dé leche. Y ese ternero es el Himalaya. Meru, que es una montaña, y el Himalaya es el ternero, y entonces ordeñan la tierra. El Himalaya hace que la tierra dé mucha leche, y ordeñan dos cosas que es muy importante para entender por qué el Himalaya es famoso en la poesía sánscrita. El Himalaya es el repositorio de los minerales y de las joyas. Los mejores minerales y las mejores joyas se encuentran en el Himalaya. Y el Himalaya también es el repositorio de las plantas medicinales, Oshadi. Es Ratna y Oshadi. Esto es muy importante porque Ratna aquí no solo significa piedras preciosas, sino que significa Shreshta Vastu. Las mejores cosas del mundo se producen allí. Y las plantas son tanto comida como el elixir de vida, Ekshira. Me paro aquí un poco porque esto puede ir muy largo, ¿eh?
Sí, sí.
Pero siempre quería decir que el Himalaya es famoso por sus minerales rojos y sus piedras preciosas en la literatura sánscrita y por ser el hogar de las plantas milagrosas, las plantas medicinales, que son plantas que brillan, que por la noche son fosforescentes. Y aquí sí que me gustaría preguntar a los que realmente conocen el Himalaya, ¿por qué estas plantas fosforescentes del Himalaya? Esto es un simple mito, pero esto sale mucho en la poesía sánscrita. Las plantas del Himalaya brillan y las mujeres, las kinnaris, que son un tipo de... Cuando hacen el amor en las cuevas no necesitan lámparas de aceite porque con las plantas son las lámparas del amor, de las kinnaris. Esto lo dice Kalidasa. Y me paro aquí porque esto se alarga.
Muchas gracias, Óscar. Es que podemos escucharle a él y es que nos viajamos con él hasta ahí. I'm very glad you brought this up. The Himalaya not just as a repository of wisdom and philosophies and tradition, but also of natural elements. Because we should not forget that it's something real. The Himalaya exists, it's there, it's out there, and something we've not mentioned yet, it is a very fragile environment. And I say fragile, and not only in the context of climate change, because it's where the waters come from. The water, it flows into the rivers that nurtures, and what's happening with glaciers drying out and all the impact that will have and the pressure of population on the Himalaya. But it's fragile also because those wisdom traditions, they should not die out. And it's interesting to see how there's a kind of parallelism about this the fragile idea of these secret wisdom traditions should not become vulgar, and we cannot commercialize with them, and such as sacred as the top of a mountain is, should also be the wisdom tradition that has seen it born.
That has happened for thousands and thousands of years. It's not going away so easily, I can tell you.
Okay, I think we have to open a round of Q&A and question-answer. I know Ranjit wanted to respond. You may to one of the mythological ideas of Meru, the Mount Meru, Kailash, from that perspective, and we'll give you the floor afterwards. Can we open the discussion for any of the questions that you might have? You may want to ask algunas preguntas, alguna intervención. Por ahí, sí, por favor.
Hola, buenos días. Les doy las gracias por su sabiduría, por darnos en esta Feria del Libro esto sobre la India. Yo tengo que contarles que hace 23 años estuve en la India.
Puede acercar y puede ser, por favor, las preguntas que sean lo más breve posible.
Vale, pues digo que, ¿ustedes qué opinan? Yo estuve hace 23 años en la India, he vuelto antes de la pandemia y he visto en Benares mucho cambio social. En el río, en las tradiciones, en las evoluciones y todas las cosas. Eso por una parte. Luego, también quiero sacar o...
¿Cuál es la pregunta, por favor? Si puede decir la pregunta.
¿Ustedes cómo ven el cambio? ¿Ha habido cambio realmente en Benares, en Varanasi?
¿En qué? ¿De antes y después de la pandemia?
No. Yo estuve en el 23, hace 23 años.
De acuerdo.
Y luego he vuelto antes de la pandemia, en el 19.
Vale, muy bien.
Y he notado un cambio social importante.
Vale, muchas gracias. She's been to India about 20 years ago, 23 years ago, and she's seen a huge change, social impact, environmental impact, and how do you relate to that change she's seen? Would you respond?
See, the change, first of all, in Indian mythology itself, we're in the change over the yugas. We are in the Kali Yuga. In the Kali Yuga, things will change, often for the worse. Sometimes we hope they revert and for the better. But the Himalayas have not changed in the sense that across India, I can speak from my hometown of Kumaon and Uttarakhand, thousands of millions of people, I mean, numbers are not the point. People are coming from every part of India to these mountains, And we cannot laugh at them because they are coming to seek. It is like Óscar said. They are coming to look for answers after the pandemic. They are worried, they are changing their goals, they are changing their attitudes. They are coming in search of something. Okay, so they are trampling on some flowers. Okay, so they are leaving some litter behind. These things can be corrected. But they are coming there to search an alternative way of life, to the steady commercialization of urban life. And that's good. They are coming back to seek the source of the sustenance that he said comes from the mountains to the rest of India. And the second thing is that the Hindu faith in these masters, it's not in the religion so much as the masters. My essay is about somebody called Neem Karoli Baba, who I think of as one of my gurus. And something astounding is happening, that there's a very famous cricketer called Kohli, and he has a famous actress wife called Anushka. They went to this temple and they Instagrammed it. As a result, the roads have got blocked. And all over India, people are just going as seekers to this one temple. The system cannot take it. But it's there, the search for answers. And just because it's a new generation and a new language and a new way of doing it, is no reason not to respect it, is what I feel.
Of course, as a former trekking guide and mountaineer, I just want to say that there are a lot of important practices that have to be brought in that we've learned, from the mistakes we made in Europe as far as sustainable tourism to the Himalayas. And I think, the people are learning slowly, gradually, and I hope there's a change soon because it's also about education and educating the local people and the guides and the tourism operators and so on. Ranjit, you wanted to respond to Óscar as well as perhaps the question?
Yes, from the point of view that the Himalayas are really the third pole. I mean, in ecological discourse, we speak of them as the third pole, but we do not accord them the respect they deserve. And I'm less optimistic about the pressure of people coming into the mountains because the corresponding burst in, say, the real estate industry is rendering an ecosystem that's already fragile even more vulnerable. There's also, to my mind, a huge contradiction between our technocratic approach to nature and what you might learn if you just listen to nature. I'm thinking here of Arunachal Pradesh with its extraordinarily vast number of dams that are being in the process of construction. This is going to lead to ecological catastrophe. It's because we don't listen to the larger than human. I mean, there's a lot of lip service about the divinity and the sacred nature of the mountains, but we're busy destroying them. If we really listened to what the rivers and the mountain peaks were telling us, we would find a more mutually agreeable way of living with nature.
And of course, it's at the same scale because the vastness of Himalaya, it can only be compared with perhaps the Amazon and what's happening there, and there are a lot of parallelisms, and that's another session perhaps. Any other, ¿alguna otra pregunta? ¿Alguna cuestión? Porque estamos llegando a nuestro fin. Perdone, primero si hay otra pregunta, si no, ¿hay alguna otra cuestión? He visto por ahí, ¿alguien quería comentar algo? ¿Sí? Anyone? It can be in English also. Javier, have you visited Himalayas? We come for the travel session later. Yeah, la montaña del Buda. Aquí tenemos a ¿Le puedes dar un micrófono a Javier, por favor? Javier Moro, para los que no lo conocen, no solamente ha escrito las famosas Pasión India, etcétera, etcétera, sino otros libros que son fantásticos.
Sí, las montañas de Buda, The Mountains of the Buddha, which portrays the Himalayas as a borderline between China and India, between two very different worlds. And in that particular story, it was the voyage, the journey of two Tibetan nuns that were escaping the situation in Lhasa and went in search of their spiritual and the man who represented the values of their country, which is the Dalai Lama. And in that book, it's a little bit, whatever you wanted to know about Tibet.
Thank you, Javier. Dalai Lama is also in the book. And his interview is a wonderful interview with Rajiv Motral. So the book, if anyone wants to buy, and there's signing of of the book. What time is the book signing, if anyone can tell me? At 1 o'clock. A la una, firma de libros en la caseta de libros. But before we end, I will try to give an answer to Óscar's question about why the plants are so bright. ¿Por qué brillan las flores y las plantas? I will try to give an answer and Namita will give her.
What I gather is that the minerals, and the sulfur, the phosphorus, these things give a glow also to these things.
Yes.
We have ghosts called twirls, which are actually phosphorant.
La capacidad fosforescente, the phosphorant plants, of course, the minerals, there are so many minerals, but there's another reason. You need two. You need the earth and you need the sky. And I'm going to tell you, if for any one of you who has been above 4,500 meters, more or less, when you start going up, 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 and I invite you all to go on a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash, or if you have the chance, you start breathing less, there's less oxygen. The quality, it's like there's no air anymore. You can see everything so sharp. The first time you experience it, everything glows. Every single item, even if you have somebody standing there, it's like when you go to, now we have smart TVs. You look at a screen of the 1980s and a screen of 5K, it's the same experience. When you go up there and if you've never seen it before, you can't imagine, you think, was I blind? I can see now things as they are. Plants, flowers, rocks, animals, and it's magic. That is why everything glows in the Himalayas. Thank you.
So as a concluding thing, I just want to say thank you to the two of you for your love of the Himalayas that came through so eloquently in your conversations. And to Ranjit, of course, but to both of you from Spain for giving love to Himalayas.
And thanks to Namita for being the heart of soul of this incredible festival, which is much more than a festival. A big round of applause to all of them, and especially to Namita and Teamwork Arts, the JLF team. Thank you. Yes.
So just to repeat the thanks to Namita Gokhale, Óscar Pujol, Ranjit Hoskote, and Guillermo Rodríguez for this very interesting session, unfortunately too short. We'd also like to thank the Valladolid City Council and the Valladolid Book Fair and our wonderful hosts, Círculo de Recreo. We're now delighted to present a token of our gratitude to our speakers. And as Guillermo mentioned before, Namita, Ranjit, and Óscar will be signing their books at the Plaza Mayor at 1 o'clock. Next, at 1 o'clock here in the Círculo de Recreo, is Age of Vice with Dipti Kapoor in conversation with Carmen Escobedo.